Hey, Ludosity fan here. For Halloween, I wanted to do something a bit different and talk about Ludosity's other flagship title, It'll Do 2. It's one of my favorite games, and when it first came out, I sort of breezed right through the game. It was nice and fun, but I felt the puzzles were a bit simple at the time. I admit I kind of beelined right to the end and didn't think twice before letting the title collect dust in my Steam library. Then I saw the email, It'll Do 2 Plus, coming for the Switch, with additional exclusive content as well. You can already tell by my name that I was a fan and would buy anything to help him out. So of course, I immediately bought the digital and physical version later that day. But thanks to the Switch's portability, I was able to play it much more thoroughly. This time I actually wanted to explore any little secrets sprinkled throughout. That's when I noticed hints to something larger, something more secret, and eventually, I stumbled upon a sign that would spark the wildest secret hunt I could ever imagine. And this is just referring to the content on the PC, stuff I missed because I was in a rush to beat the game. So today, I want to guide you through this large elaborate hunt, so be warned, there will be massive spoilers. And let us start right at the beginning. It'll Do 2 is an adventure game, with a mix of action and puzzles sprinkled throughout. You play as Itle, an adventurer who washes up on the shore of a dungeon-filled island. Shortly after crashing, Itle and Tipsy talks with an old man named Pascal, who urges the pair to go away. During his protests, Tipsy steals a magical map from him and shows that there are several dungeons housing raft pieces for the two to steal. He merely grumps and tells them to not solve anything before poofing off. Now right at the start, we're free to explore anywhere. This game is pretty open-ended, and you're allowed to travel any way you want. You can explore and find hidden optional caves with puzzles that reward you with either items, crayons, or even more maps that lead to more secrets. Though it's pretty open-ended, there are certain areas that are more difficult than others, and the game does nudge you in a particular direction so you can power up appropriately. The game is pretty difficult, with hordes of enemies unique to each world ready to beat you up. Thankfully, there are buffs and different weapons that can both help you defeat enemies and help solve puzzles faster. The goal is to explore the several worlds, travel across them to explore the 7 thematic dungeons that hold their own unique enemies, treasures, and eventually hosts a boss fight at the end. Though the dungeons can be completed in any order, the bosses themselves are set in a cycle, as in you always fight the weakest boss first and face the strongest boss last. But I digress. From the intro scene, it's pretty clear that Pascal is hiding something more than just a tourist attraction for adventurers. Halfway through, Pascal realizes we're completing the adventure and tries to get us to stop one more time before poofing. Eventually, when we collect the 7 raft pieces, we're allowed to enter the final dungeon. Inside, there are diary notes that provide some context, one even mentioning his brother. Apparently his brother, Carver, the old man who crafted the adventure in the first It'll Do game, was the one that created this island. His portrait can be seen in the boss room too. Finally, we get to face the final boss, Pascal. I mean, it was kind of obvious that he would be the final boss. And it's a large one. He transforms the room, each one representing a dungeon you've already completed that has puzzles to solve to open the way to whack him. It then shifts to facing all those unique enemies in each dungeon before finally getting to face the old man himself. Once you're done cornering and beating him down to a pulp, he finally explains himself somewhat. He was apparently tired of cleaning after adventurers, resetting the puzzles every time it was completed. But Tipsy points out that they were the first adventurers here, and he shuts up once again. However, Itle threatens him, and he drops a forbidden key. And if you're someone who made a straight beeline for the raft pieces, like I was, this will most likely be your first one. This is a hint that there is something far more than just the average adventure waiting for you. Acquiring the first forbidden key also makes a certain NPC in a staff area pop up. Jenny Mermaid. She mentions that Pascal has told everyone never to mention him. Now, things are getting interesting. To find the other keys, the player must explore the hidden caves sprinkled across the island. They have to find the secret shards, and with every 8 that you find, you can bring them to these tall black obelisks tucked away in certain locations. The first one can actually be found in the first area you start in, Fluffy Fields. Once you have 8, you can push the button to reveal a secret dungeon. Almost immediately, the tone shifts. The player steps into a metallic dungeon containing puzzles and enemies that are far more challenging than the normal ones they come across. There are even toned down versions of the bosses you fought who act more like mini-bosses. Much like the main dungeons, each secret dungeon contains a pack of crayons and a weapon that's used to solve the puzzles inside. and at the end of every dungeon, there is a boss fight. Ultra Mecha Bun defends the treasure, and makes references to the Queen of Adventure. The fight starts, and it's a huge callback to the first iTTLE secret boss. After the tough fight, a chest drops down, rewarding the player with yet another forbidden key. From here on out, the dungeons get bigger, the puzzles get harder, and the enemies get tougher, with each one having another Ultra Mecha Bun to defeat, who also progressively becomes stronger. There are 3 of these secret dungeons in total, with the last one requiring 24 secret shards to unlock. Fun fact, there are actually 36 shards sprinkled throughout the world. After getting 24, the rest of them turn into Portal World scrolls that mark places on your map to visit and find even more useful items for your journey. So it's not like you have to sweep the island clean of every little secret to unlock these optional dungeons. Once all 4 keys are acquired, you can make your way to the Lonely Road and head to the right side. You can see Paso planted numerous signs, warning you not to step into the fortress. In the room above you, you see 4 keyholes, needed to summon the Forbidden One.
Ah! It's not possible!
Once you insert all 4 keys, it's time to head in. Here is the true final dungeon. This dungeon contains the toughest enemies, where even the mini boss battles you previously had are relegated to mere enemy status, sometimes with more than one packed into the room. This dungeon also has the most difficult puzzles, where knowing how all 4 of your tools work together are needed to make it through. Even then, that's not enough. You might notice that there are a couple puzzles that seem impossible no matter how stubborn you are. In the end, you're forced to do what any sensible gamer would do, and assume there's something more inside, maybe yet another tool or a weapon. Eventually, you come across more diaries. Apparently, Eitz and Carver got bored of waiting for adventurers and created a robot to test the puzzles out. The robot successfully completed the quest and was so enamored by it that it did it again, and again, and again. Each time the robot completed the adventure, Paso had to reset all the puzzles. Eventually, the robot was trying to speedrun the island in different ways and began to make its own dungeons under Paso's nose. When he discovered that, he disassembled her, chucking the secret shards in various caves and locking the place up. Eventually, you see Sim's notes on her own dungeons, rating them and critiquing them on how they could be better. At the end of the Hall of Difficult Puzzles, you find a tool to end all tools, the Exploding Flaming Chainsaw Shotgun, or the EFCS for short. This bad boy can solve any puzzle. Just stay still, hold the attack button, and listen as iTTLE hums while revving up destruction. No, really, this thing solves any puzzle. Just use it on any puzzle item like a gate, crystal, or even a locked door, and that thing will be solved. With that acquired, most puzzles in this dungeon have already been solved, save for a couple literally impossible ones, place for you to test your new love out. There's even a chest with a pack of crayons hiding behind one. Finally, the path to the final boss is available. Once you enter the boss room, you march up to this pulsating core, and have all your secret shards fly out to form the final encounter, Simulacrum. She reveals her plans to catalog all the NPCs, including those in the staff area, before depopulating the island to carve out a bigger and better adventure. And before this discussion can steer into morality territory, oh iTTLE, the fight finally starts. She is vicious, she is fast, and she is equipped with a similar arsenal as you. She first approaches you swinging a fiery blade about. You must master the dodge roll for this fight. It's the only way you can both dodge her attacks and be fast enough to close in and get a few shots. She then switches to the next attack, one that represents an insanely leveled force wand. She spews projectiles all around her before firing 4 piercing lasers in a row. She homes in on you slowly, so you can circle around her with each dash and hopefully get in a few hits. Next, she gets all goddess on us and starts exploding the place. She hops 4 times, each time placing some dynamite that explodes after about a second. She then tries to dash in on us, giving a good window to either place some dynamite ourselves or get a couple swings in before she creates an even bigger explosion. And finally, she hops back and starts attacking with an ice ring. She spews icicles like the projectiles from before. She then hops forward, creating an icy explosion like with the dynamite. Once her health is cut down to about a third, she screams in frustration and changes form. This time she abandons all those adventurer tools and begins to extend those long sharp claws to swipe at you on her own. She then skids back and prepares a machine gun-like attack, shooting several pellets at you. She then charges her ultimate attack. It looks scary at first, but this animation does take a bit of wind-up, so try to get a few shots in with your wand or a few swings in with your blade if you're close enough before plopping some dynamite on your way out. Also, it's kind of my headcanon that this attack was stolen from Cyber Jenny. In her last fight, you notice her charging up something similar, but nothing fires out. Finally, at the end, she begins attacking you with the tri-spray attack that signals the intended rage before she skids back and does the whole attack cycle all over again. Once you've taken her out, Paso moves in, demanding an explanation. Sim begins to explain that her action wasn't out of madness, but adoration for the journey that was crafted for her to solve. Paso admits that he too often looks up to his brother for his creativity. Idylle and Tipsy are then rewarded for bringing this touching moment together and are given the big old pile of loot, the proof that you accomplished the game. Idylle then goes into rehab for drinking too many health potions, and the island explodes. The end. So that's it. That's the true story and the true final boss. There's nothing much left needing to be solved. You can even go to the staff area and mingle with the NPCs who congratulates you. And that's the true ending. But not all there is to this story. Like I mentioned at the start, I stumbled upon a secret. A hidden sign with nothing but gibberish. I started to look more into it, only to realize that it would lead me into one of the wildest goose chases I've ever seen in video game history. Believe it or not, there's an even deeper and more secret layer hidden within iTTLE 2. One with only vague hints that lead into other hints, and secrets hidden within secrets that are also hidden within a secret. I'm not lying. To unravel this web, let's start from the top, and see what the people have to say. For more direction, we can visit this bar at the northwest section of Sandy Shore. In it, there are these lean boos that speak to you. They speak of an open wall behind a parasol. The plant behind the chest is not like the rest. The cats in Lonely Road know all about the sparkly white gates and 4 incomplete signs. What do they mean? This can get confusing and go off the rails fairly quickly, so let's take this step by step, starting from the top. First of all these secrets pertain to the sparkly gates, known as the portal worlds. They typically reward you with an item or a weapon. So the first hint we get is an open world behind a parasol. In the Fancy Ruins section of the game, you can come across a portal world called Farthest Shore. Near the end of the puzzle, you can see a parasol trying to hide an opening. You step inside, and you're taken to nowhere. There only seems to be a couple of signs giving tips, one of them telling you that you can extend your rolls down slopes. There's a slope just a bit out of sight, in the corner somewhat submerged in the water. You roll down, and sure enough, there's a third sign, one spouting gibberish. Right here, this is our first clue towards unlocking the bigger picture. We can't solve this yet until we find a cipher, so let's just tuck this away in our folder and move on. Next, we have the plant behind the chest is not like the rest. Again, pretty vague, and refers to a chest hidden within the pearly white gates. For this one in specific, we're going to visit Star Woods and find a portal world known as Former Colossus. And sure enough, around the corner of the chest, there is a destructible object that lets us venture in a little deeper. Step into the plant behind the chest, and you're warped to the Cave of Mystery. At first, there's not much to it, just the apathetic frog sitting there impassively. And in a room over to your right, you come across an impossible puzzle, with a sign hinting you may need to find something first. After defeating Simulacrum, we know what that something is. That's right, the EFCS is the key to this puzzle. Now this area will be a neat treat for those who played the original iTTLE 2. It's the castle outskirts. Aiton's shop is there, and stepping inside reveals that he's gone for new ventures. There's a boulder in place preventing us from visiting the original Warp Garden, and talking with Tipsy also shows what ended up happening with him. Neat. Stepping into the castle itself is a cool Easter egg the devs created. Old men from the original iTTLE 2 stand in place for the devs, speaking nonsensically, as they always do. There's a console you can whack to play some pointless minigame, where you snowboard downhill as a duck. But hidden within this building are 2 more hints. Another hidden sign in Laura's room. Break the cracked wall and reveal the secret sign. Let's tuck this one away for now as well. We're also given another secret, Frog Mode. Starting a new game with the file name Frog Mode unlocks a new difficulty mode, where you play as the apathetic frog as seen from before. This time iTTLE's portrait is replaced, and doesn't say much, and you only start with 1 heart. Thankfully, the devs give you the ability to increase your HP with crayons. Alright, let's move on to the next hint. 4 incomplete signs. What do they mean? Now this is where the real work has to be put in. Occasionally you may stumble across signs that seem incomplete. The first one is in the beginning area of Fluffy Fields. Spruce, that is. The second can be found in Sweetwater Coast, the treasure chest. The third in the Spicy Pepper Pain Plains, next to. And finally, Lonely Road. Enter the. Together, they read, enter the spruce that is next to the treasure chest. For this particular one, we have to reach Moon Garden, which is all the way at the end of Lonely Road. Moon Garden is a tough fight, but eventually you'll make it through, and directly left to the chest, you'll find a hidden area. Here we find Abyssal Plains, a secret world with only 4 signs to read. These are pretty good tips, but there does seem to be more intended to be discovered. Walk around and you'll notice you can walk off the pathways. Head to the southwest side and you'll find some bubbles. Step in, and yup, another secret world. Place from younger days. This area seems to be modeled after the iTTLE prototype, the original version that Joel and Remar worked on as a thesis for college a whole decade ago from the time this video was made. Eventually, you'll come across an old man that begins to play back a recording made by iTTLE. It provides some lore for the game and gives a good idea about the timeline, but our target is located in the northwest section of the map. This is gibberish sign number 3. Let's tuck this away and move on, which we will find when we go talk to the cats in Lonely Road. You have to find their hideout, which is hidden in an optional cave that's hinted to you by a jetting flower. Step inside, solve the puzzle, and talk to them. They speak mostly nonsense, but the lazy sleeping one gives the biggest hint. The fragile frog meets a gossipy girl by the downhill duck. What does this mean? Well, remember the frog mode hint we were given? And the Easter egg with the game console? Well, fragile frog means you, as in you have to meet the gossipy girl by the downhill duck. The duck in this case being the minigame of the duck going downhill. Whoever this girl is, you have to meet her here as the frog. But remember, that place is locked behind an impossible puzzle. So do you know what this means? Starting a new game, getting killed a lot with only 1 heart, acquiring all the raft pieces, gathering 24 secret shards, upgrading yourself, if you're bad like me, to minimize dying, and go through all those secret dungeons once more so you can unlock the path to Simulacrum, and acquire the EFCS all over again. I mean, once you have it, you don't need to beat Sim, but that would mean doing games halfway, and if we've gotten this far, we are not leaving anything behind. And then coming back to unlock the gate to Ludo City. And here we can meet Jenny Berry. She gives us a thumbs up for making it this far and tells us to stand still in the southeasternmost part of the warp garden for 30 seconds. And sure enough, yet another secret place. This time it's Berry's home, with 3 more tips. One is just naming ourselves Jenny Berry so we could play as her. And the other is a crack wall that leads to another sign to decipher. This is sign number 4. Let's tuck this one away as well. Finally, there's a vague hint about how she will be traveling all over the island, depending on how many raft pieces you have. You know what this means? Starting yet another new game, so we can find her depending on how many raft pieces we collect. It won't be too bad though. In the staff area there's an artist who paints a map on her canvas. She rates your raft pieces, but the painting itself also changes with each one you collect. So if you complete a single dungeon and come back, she has a new point for you to explore on the canvas. After completing the first dungeon and matching it up with your map, if it's filled, it shows you to head over to Pepper Paint Prairie next. So out we go, and in the northeastern side we can find her telling us about a person-sized patch that looks crooked. If you head directly south to this cow bun, you can find a portal world by chilling with this dude. An NPC gives us a hint to do this, so it's not a complete shot in the dark. After getting abducted by aliens and completing the maze part, you can head to this section and whack the crooked wall with your stick. At first it gives us specific stats about optional caves, until you notice a second crooked patch. Whack that, and here you have some numbers to go with your letters. Sign number 5. Let's get one more raft piece, and find Barry in the frozen court, who tells us about a cracked wall that might require more than just a stick to reach. A nearby optional cave contains a cracked wall across a short gap. You'll need the ice wand and the force wand to reach it, like so you can reveal the next sign, some more letters. To save time, I can tell you now that those first 2 pieces are the only ones we need to reveal hints relevant to our chase. We're done with the fragile frog and the cats and the ghosts, so now we can begin deciphering. Let's pair the letters with the digits, matching them up with the amount of characters there are. Now to decipher, you merely take the letter and go up the alphabet by the number it's associated with. So the letter A is linked with a number 1 and makes B. We have O that's linked with 3, so count up from the alphabet 3 times to get R, count up C 2 times from the alphabet to get E, and so forth. Go on and we get the following message. Break 3 walls and join the beckoning one. Quarter hearts. Beckon for 7 minutes. Beckon between the altar and the icon. Beckon with 40. This is our final hint to the game's darkest secrets. 40 quarter hearts is in reference to our HP. Each crayon raises it by a quarter. 40 quarters meaning we need max HP. Next, break 3 walls. There's only one secret in the portal world that requires breaking 3 walls, and it's in Frozen Court, all the way in the southeastern end of the game. Step into the portal world to enter the lost city of Avlop. At the last room with the chest, you can see this archway propped up against the wall. Break it, step inside, and reveal an altar with enchanting hex rot. Now, hex rots have their own unique lore in this game. There is text in the Grand Library where Aiden mentions that they have discovered immortality. Jenny Berry also gives a bit of lore. If you have no raft pieces, she can be found at the end of Lonely Road, and mentions that the carrots crossed over into another dimension, beckoned by some promised remedy. And finally, there's some text in another portal world, known as the Wall of Text, where a hidden diary entry mentions that they were beckoned by the promise of immortality, chanting for 100 years, entering the sky of his domain, and all they want is to be reborn in his image. So, this one is chanting for 100 years, hoping to enter some kind of domain. Let's heed the hint, step between the altar and the icon, and wait for 7 minutes. Let's do this. Immediately you're greeted with the text of the secret world, the promised remedy. But there are no immediate paths available. You open up for a tip, but you see Tipsy speaking in that same gibberish. There's not much you can do here, except rev up that EFCS and open your own pathway. So this area is definitely creepy. You have puzzle objects strewn about the area with no meaning. And in the next room, you have fish buns swirling about like they're hazards. And all kinds of creepy shadowy figures. What's more, there are a few more signs hidden within. They all translate to, you don't need puzzles, you don't need enemies, you don't need to escape. Finally, you find a respawn point, and a long path to one final room. This is it. The ultimate secret. You walk above the floating abyss, not knowing what awaits you. But, if you decipher Tipsy's tip, you know what you're expecting. That guy. Now the strategy here is simple to explain, but difficult to execute. He shoots out 2 different projectiles, green ones that disperses straight ahead, and these red orbs that home in on you. It's imperative that you dodge roll into them so they can fade and give you some time to attack. Regular weapons won't work. There's only one way to solve this puzzle, the exploding flaming chainsaw shotgun. It picks up a bit once you whittle his HP halfway down, but the strategy is essentially the same. Once you defeat him, you're taken to a room with a rack of clothes. Whack it and you receive a costume to reward you. You become that guy. There are other guys throughout the world as well. You might remember stumbling upon them in different places. They all have something to say while you wear the costume too. So that's basically it. For the PC version, the Switch has a whole new world for us to explore. A world filled with harsh puzzles, and yet another secret to find. There's actually a hint in the game's manual as well. But before we get into that, I want to let a buddy of mine take care of this last section for us. He helped procure the footage needed, and this will be the first time there will be footage provided for Dreamworld's secret. Card 41.
Hey everyone, Repiteo here, president of the Garfield fan club and Slap City fanatic. Though, if there's one game that Ludosity has created that I'm as big a fan of as Slap City, it would be iTTLE 2. iTTLE 2 was a game that was generally very positively received all across the board, but some fans of the first game ended up disappointed. This disappointment primarily stems from the fact that the second game took to emphasizing combat over proper puzzle solving. After having played both games, I can somewhat see where they were coming from. I wouldn't say I was disappointed, but I'd be lying to myself if I didn't admit that iTTLE 1 had the superior puzzles. This is largely a consequence of ID2's open world design, and the ability for every overworld puzzle to require only a stick to solve. The developers must have taken this criticism to heart, because when they were granted the opportunity for what is effectively an expansion pack through iTTLE 2 Plus, they decided to put emphasis back on the puzzles, much like the original. They primarily achieved this through doing away with the stick-only mentality of the rest of the game, instead opting for dungeons which are specifically built around a certain part of iTTLE's unlockable kit, very much like the first game. Though, unlike the first game, and unlike any other puzzle or dungeon in the series, these dungeons will force a certain tool on you. There's no cheesing out sections of these dungeons. You either solve it the intended way, or you don't solve it at all. Hell, you can't even bring the EFCS to the Dream World period, so trying to circumvent the gate to the final Dream Portal is a total impossibility. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before we are even introduced to the Dream Portals, we get a rundown of just what the purpose of the Dream World is to our adventure. Nothing. No, really. As far as practical rewards go, it's literally nothing. The Dream World's rewards are entirely based around collectibles that don't actually improve ITTLE's strengths whatsoever. A collectible that is, yet again, a callback to ITTLE Do 1. Cards. These cards are the main thing to be gained from going through these various dungeons, with the game boasting a total of 40 to collect in all. With 8 collectible in each dungeon, 5 not counting the 3 that are always rewarded after a boss fight, the amount of optional trials that you must overcome are fairly staggering. Though that's nothing to say of the mandatory trials, because as Ginnycat mentions, there are several switches that need to be pressed in order to progress to the final area of this realm. This is an impossible puzzle upon entering the Dream World, regardless of ITTLE's kit, because of the lack of the EFCS. The only way to progress in this final area is to find 4 more creatures willing to stand on the switches, all of which can be found at the end of their respective dungeon. Speaking of dungeons, let's get started with the first dungeon you are likely to be able to access if you are progressing through ITTLE Do 2 as the developers intended: Wizardry Lab. Throughout the entirety of Wizardry Lab, ITTLE's primary tools are completely stripped down, with the exception of the Force Wand. Consequently, all the puzzles in this dungeon are built around mirrors, electric barriers, and time challenges that utilizes the Force Wand in one way or another. The primary theming of this dungeon is built around electronics and technology. Fittingly, the end goal of this specific dungeon is to channel 4 electrical wires into a giant laser that'll blast away the final door in order to access the boss of this area. A mechanical crystal that the game never gives an actual name to. Unfortunately, this is the start of a disappointing trend. The Dream World's dungeons are some of the best in the series in how they emulate ITTLE Do 1, but the bosses do as well, and they were one of the weaker aspects of that game. The mechanical crystal isn't so much a boss as it is a micro-puzzle, built around ricocheting its own projectiles with a finite amount of mirrors. A fine puzzle, don't get me wrong, but a letdown as a proper boss of an area. Upon taking down this bucket of bolts and reaching the final area, we rescue a rock with the face painted on it.
I got a rock.
Neat. Just plop it down on one of the switches, whatever. Next, we are greeted with perhaps the most unique dungeon of this expansion, if not the entirety of the ITTLE Do series, Syncope. Initially, the dungeon may not seem like anything out of the ordinary, but that is quickly subverted when, upon entering the first room above, you're greeted with an impossible puzzle. Try as you might, there is nothing that can be done here for now, so let's move on. The first section of this dungeon plays out similar to Wizardry Lab, focusing on dynamite-oriented puzzles. Standard fare, albeit rather creative in execution. But then you reach this room, with the note that only one of these buttons will allow ITTLE to pass. While initially ambiguous, the nature of these buttons becomes clear when returning to the impossible room. Or rather, what was once the impossible room, as this switch gives way to a puzzle that can actually be solved. Think of this as foreshadowing to how the rest of the dungeon is handled. With only a handful of exceptions, the puzzles are no longer self-contained. Virtually every puzzle has its solution in another room, and the real puzzle is connecting the dots on your own. This dungeon is almost like a bite-sized version of the That Guy's secret in the main game. Moreover, the dungeon is totally removed from the other dungeons of the game as well, with immortal guardians patrolling the halls, hints given through shadowy apparitions and doppelgangers, and ghastly blockades only seen here. This area does not at all want to fit the standard mold of an ITTLE Do dungeon. This even expands to the quote-unquote boss room, in that there isn't one. It's just a puzzle room that can be accessed at any time upon reaching the second half of this dungeon, but can only be properly solved when the rest of the area is solved, and this block is sent into the room. While it is somewhat disappointing that there isn't a proper boss fight, at least this area doesn't attempt to conceal that, so I'd say it's acceptable. Upon entering the final area, we are greeted with the ghastly Boontar, Osalig. And this is where things start to get interesting. Osalig describes himself as having been put there by a big larva. Huh. Well, no time to dwell on that. Grab your cards and head back out to the main area to find that our job is halfway done. Next up is another fairly unnerving dungeon, the Bottomless Tower. The tone throughout the entirety of this dungeon is very somber and subdued, with music shifting from soft melancholy strumming to nothing more than the chilling winds around you. And as the environment implies, the main gimmick of this area revolves around all things ice. The ice wand, ice block puzzles, which I'm really bad at, frozen obstacles, and melting ice through fire. However, without the flame sword or any of its upgraded variants, we must rely on traditional flames to light the way. Well, mostly traditional anyway, because this dungeon introduces a mechanic unique to itself: magic fire. While functionally identical to fire, the flame persists, allowing it to be taken to another room, making otherwise impossible obstacles circumventable. Though that doesn't make these obstacles any less daunting, especially as we go deeper and deeper into the tower. The darkness that was once merely a minor presence starts to seep in more and more, like a ceaseless fog. Avoiding obstacles in this haze is tricky, but certainly doable, so march on undeterred. Upon reaching the boss room, we are greeted with pitch-black nothingness, and only a few moments pause before... Rising from the void, a crystal skull charges without warning, brandishing a scythe and a fireball. Attacking it head-on proves to be useless. Before you can start experimenting with your other options, a second skull rises. But with it, rises hope, as we discover the boss's weakness: itself. It can't take its own heat. Planning around this would be somewhat easy if it was just the two of them. But of course, it's not that simple. Avoiding the onslaught from this fight is an endurance test, emphasizing the ability to dodge roll scythes and bait fireballs into the other skulls. This works well until only a single skull remains, at which point you must utilize the ice wand to reflect its own fireballs back, ending the fight. Easily one of the best boss fights in the game. In the final room, we manage to rescue an unnamed wealthy turnip who promises us a fabulous reward. Allegedly. Though in this conversation, we once again hear talk of some sort of larva being the cause of her kidnapping. Coincidence? Possibly. But no matter. The rescue is successful and we are able to journey onward. The penultimate dungeon we must traverse through is Anagram, whose gimmick is readily apparent as soon as entering the first room. Mirroring. Not literal mirrors like Wizardry Lab, but structurally, the entire dungeon is a reflection of itself. The tools Idle has access to are the Flame Sword and Chain, and with this access comes a returning mechanic from the first game: bombs. While not able to press switches like the first game, they still overall serve the same function, setting off in one area while you're in another, so you can activate two objects simultaneously. They're a proto-dynamite in a lot of respects, but without dynamite on hand in this dungeon, we must make do with what we're given. And what we're given are puzzles that all build around the mirror gimmick. This primarily comes in the form of either memorization puzzles, or puzzles with similar solutions that are only slightly different, which can throw one off mentally more than you'd expect. Though there isn't much variance beyond that, it's just long enough to sustain the length of this dungeon without feeling too worn out. That said, the boss of this area is a joke. Instead of somehow inventively capitalizing on the mirror gimmick that was present and built up through the rest of the dungeon, we instead have a slab of ice with a face. In a room with projectiles that hurt itself. And only a single attack per phase. You don't even have to dodge. The natural pushback of the sword always lets you escape danger and apply damage at a rapid rate. It's easily the worst boss in the series, and unfortunately a bitter note to end on from an otherwise solid dungeon. In the final room we meet a plain old safety genie, terrified out of her mind. Not like that's anything out of the ordinary, but it's what she's terrified of that's interesting. She made a mistake by sleeping with the lights on and was stolen away by a big, icky larva. This is no coincidence. This is a very real pattern. Thusly, our end goal reveals itself. Taking out these larvae. And there's only one place where they can be. Quietus. This is iTTLE 2's answer to the Master Cave. A merciless trial of a dungeon that will test everything you've learned up to this point. You have all your tools on hand, but this is a double-edged sword, because the dungeon is designed with this in mind. So instead of having the tools to cheese a puzzle, often all these tools are mandatory to the puzzle. I will refrain going into much detail on this dungeon, as the difficulty of the puzzles is the entire appeal of the area, and it doesn't have a traditional gimmick. The closest thing to a gimmick for this area is not with the layout nor the puzzles, but the enemies. The only way to combat the threats of this realm are with explosives. Specifically, dynamite. This isn't just the standard enemies either, as dynamite is the key to taking out the boss of this area, foreshadowed throughout the majority of the dream world. The giant larva? Alright, the size may have been exaggerated, but that's definitely a cocoon of some sorts, and they've certainly been stealing away people from their sleep. Hopefully those Jinnies trying to get some shut-eye aren't disturbed by the explosives because, again, that's the only way this thing is getting destroyed. Though, you getting damaged isn't a huge concern, because the attack patterns on display are fairly basic. A slight dash attack, an aerial strike, and a projectile barrage are all this thing is capable of. The real challenge comes in being able to get just close enough to lay down a dynamite without being in harm's reach. But upon completing this challenge, the true antagonist reveals itself. A giant derpy butterfly! And it's about as threatening as it looks. That is to say, it isn't. Granted, the method by which you take it down, i.e. using multiple tools in iTTLE's kit in conjunction with one another, is unique to this fight and does give it a certain complexity not seen in other bosses. But complexity does not equal difficulty, as it only cycles through two different attack patterns, both of which are heavily telegraphed. Once again, the challenge of the fight mostly comes down to being close enough to damage it, yet far enough to react to its attacks. But once you have a feel for the spacing and the timing of the attacks, the rest of the fight is smooth sailing. Give it one last explosion for good measure, and revel as it bursts into dream goop. With the threat now thoroughly liquefied, collect the final 3 cards to bring your collection to a full 40, and, well, that's it. Upon returning to the dream world, Jenny Cat congratulates you on taking out the threat. Without you, the threat of the napping flies would have been disastrous, especially if left alone too long. Oddly specific information dump when it's no longer relevant, but hey, mission accomplished. We've collected every single card, rescued every single creature, plus rock, and vanquished every single monster. The dream world is now at peace. And with that, we can leave this realm, knowing that we've done everything there is to do. That's what I thought to myself the first time I completed the dream world, that there was nothing left to explore. And I thought this for a perfectly valid reason. There weren't any cryptic hints leading to some sort of other area. If there was something hidden, the game would give some sort of heads up and not leave the player completely in the dark. Well, little did I know, the game actually did have some cryptic hints towards another secret of the dream world, in the manual. This is something I was not initially aware of, because I ended up purchasing ID2 Plus digitally. But included with the physical edition is this hint telling you to use ice and force to cross this spike trap. To cross this particular area of the Dreamworld Hub. Now, technically speaking, you don't need this hint to know that there is some sort of oddity in this area. The invisible bridge does slightly manifest itself anytime you come close to it, but this on its own felt a little too obtuse. A slight nudge in the right direction on what tools to use and why you're using them is just enough for players to connect the dots, and I wish the digital version had some sort of equivalent. Nevertheless, even though the tools are laid out, setting it up is another story. It's actually pretty impressive how this setup that we've seen countless times in dungeons is suddenly applied to an overworld setting. The unorthodox geometry inherent to most overworld maps and the addition of timing and off-screen cue makes this a surprisingly memorable puzzle, and feel like a genuine reward for managing to execute it.
Or you could just do this brain-dead exploit that works too.
Greediness on the other side is something that was foreshadowed to the observant players who actually looked at their Dreamworld map. The House of Secrets. In here, we learn some lore that isn't readily apparent in the base game, such as making an explicit connection to the artist and raft pieces, and the fact that the game console in Ludo City is interactable. Other lore directly pertains to the napping flies, which emphasizes just how much of the bullet we dodged by taking out that pupa when it was still as small as it was. More disconcerting, however, is the lore on their origins, and how they reside in our subconscious, the dreamless darkness of our minds. Yeah, that's not completely terrifying. The last 2 bits of info we get read much more like flavor text. A brave dreamer travels around the whole world. A brave dreamer is not satisfied with doing something only once. A brave dreamer, huh? The word choice feels deliberate, not only in making the action feel like something that only a brave soul could accomplish, but in making what would otherwise feel like flavor text instead read out more like instructions. Even still, they feel distinctly out of place. Still, most people didn't read much into it, and to them, that was the end of the House of Secrets, and the end of the Dreamworld. We got some lore and some helpful tips for the main game. Sounds like a win to me. But no, this building is not what it seems. These tips aren't the only things that are out of place in this room. Excluding the bookshelves, of course, everything in this house is destructible. With one exception. The globe. Which also has a unique tile underneath it, further making it seem distinct. It's subtle, but for a few, it was enough. Yes, traveling around the world in this case means circling around the globe, and not being satisfied doing it once means that this action is to be repeated. It's a rare instance of a lateral thinking puzzle, and not many would be able to pick up on it. But if you do, you're rewarded with a code. And there's nothing in this house that's going to point you in the right direction either. We may have the code, but it doesn't do us much good without an access point. One thing is certain. The area where this code can be entered must encompass all 3 of these symbols. And, of course, it must be somewhere in the Dreamworld. What follows is what feels like a literal Easter egg hunt, searching through every nook and cranny of every area in the various dungeons, trying to find the one Easter egg cleverly tucked away. The search can feel maddening. Until... Before continuing, I'd like to say directly to those of you who have played ID2 Plus on your own time and thought that you completed the Dreamworld but are not familiar with what comes next, to stop this video now and see for yourself. Though this is an informational video, what comes next is an experience that is best played through firsthand. For everyone else, well, I have a simple question for you. What is another name for a dreamless darkness? A night terror.
I shouldn't be editing all night.
Sweet dreams.
iTTLE 2 has many secrets, some out in the open and others tucked firmly beneath many layers. The path to that guy was a joint effort on the Steam forums and was quickly solved by users within a couple of days. Some of the devs even admitted that they weren't aware of the secret and were in on the hunt. The Dreamworld secret, however, took many months, with the only mention of it existing was Remar retweeting the fact that someone finally found Card 41. I was with the latter, only discovering that there was more to Dreamworld upon reading that tweet. And even though the secret has finally been uncovered, I can't help but feel that not all secrets or mysteries have been solved. Take for instance this pillar, where destroying it spawns a mysterious laugh. And we have Jenny Lemon, whose involvement in the games remain an open-ended mystery. So even if all secrets have been uncovered, the devs did a great job in creating a game where an aura of mystery and wonder exists at all times. A world where potentially any rock that remains unturned can hold the smallest of secrets, whether it's an amusing caption or a wild hunt that leads you into a world of nightmares. My name is Ludosity Fan, and I sincerely hoped you enjoyed this video. Thank you. Hey, I just wanted to give a quick thanks to the Ludosity and SEO Discord for helping me out and being such an awesome supportive community. I also wanted to give my thanks to Rep for providing the footage needed for Dreamworld and being a guest for this video. I spent a good deal of time making this video, and if you'd like to help this small channel grow, you can help by liking this video and sharing it to anyone you think might be interested. Thanks again for watching. See ya!